So, welcome to Mums Get Fit Retreat, how to get your body back and feel sexy after kids. This is the free online event specifically for the busy mum who wants to lose weight, tone up, and feel confident in herself and her body by eating better, working out, and working on her mindset. I am your host, Jessica Marie, and today we have a very special guest with us, Ali Damron, who is a wife, mother of two sweet little boys, a licensed acupuncturist, and a certified personal trainer. She runs her own successful private practice as an acupuncturist and has done so for the last 8 years. These last 4 years, she took her message to the online platform where she does one-on-one coaching and consults for women's health and hormones, business coaching, and also she offers digital courses. Ali has a podcast called The Ali Damron Show, and her business podcast is called You're So Lucky. Welcome, Ali.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
You're so welcome. So tell me a bit about your journey, where you started and why you do what you do.
Absolutely. So I grew up in Western Nebraska in the United States, which is a place where holistic health, natural living health is not really a thing. We just not really exposed to that at all as a kid. And in my teenage years, a lot of family members were exposed to a lot of health issues, cancers, heart disease, those types of things. And, I watched my parents and grandparents go through tough things, tough surgeries, tough treatments, tough medications, tough diagnoses, all of these things. And I just remember thinking as a kid, there has to be maybe a better way, or are these things just bound to happen? Can we prevent them? All of those things. And so I started my journey with getting into health through fitness, and I became a personal trainer in college. So I started really liking to run and doing strength training and things like that. And so I decided that I wanted to be a personal trainer, and that kind of led me down into the corporate wellness world. And in my journey as being a personal trainer in corporate wellness, I realized that so many people were having other health things, much like my family did: heart disease, autoimmune disease, chronic diseases, things like that. And it just kind of got me more interested in okay, well, how can we help these people? What can we do with them? How can we improve their quality of life? And I was actually exposed. I went to a college up in Arizona, where it is a little bit more naturally minded. There's a much bigger pool of people that are exposed to a lot of other things than I was. And so I got to meet people who had done things like chiropractic care and organic eating and acupuncture and just some different things that I had never heard of before. And so they sort of led me into the water of all of this world. And I just, went to my own acupuncturist. I tried it, and to be honest, these people that did acupuncture for me were the healthiest people, or healthiest looking people I'd ever seen. Their skin was glowing, and they just talked about health in a completely different way than I had ever heard before. And so I just kind of went down that journey, and I just really was inspired to become my own, or to become an acupuncturist on my own. And then I did that and had children kind of at the end of acupuncture school in the beginning of my practice, and really liked helping specifically moms go through all the, journeys that we go through with postpartum body image and hormones and thyroid health and mood, periods, all of those types of things. So that kind of led me to where I am today.
It's an inspiring story. I love your journey. So what is insulin resistance, and what are the signs and symptoms of this?
Yeah, so insulin resistance is interesting. So when I talk about hormones, I talk about I talk about it in a pyramid. So at the bottom of this pyramid for all of our hormones, so often we hear about PCOS, or polycystic ovarian syndrome, or PMS, thyroid stuff, all of these things. And on the very bottom of this pyramid is our stress hormone, cortisol, adrenaline, and insulin. And so insulin is our blood sugar hormone. When we eat a carbohydrate, our pancreas produces insulin to go in and basically mop up that blood sugar, either stored in the muscles or liver. And then once that's full, it stores it over into body fat. And if your body's exposed over and over and over to carbohydrates, too much blood sugar, it takes more and more of that insulin to really do the job and get that out of there. And so that's what we hear when we hear insulin resistance. We're hearing that your body's needing more and more insulin to really get the same result, to get that blood sugar out. And so, you know, people that have had a lot of processed food, a lot of sugar, a lot of refined carbohydrates, they tend to become a little bit insulin resistant down the road. The other thing that contributes to this is actually stress. So if you have a lot of stress hormone like cortisol, it's not uncommon to see us become a little bit more insulin resistant from that too, just because cortisol produces more insulin. So that's kind of what it is. In terms of symptoms, it's wide, right? So we can hear things like, I mean, obviously we hear diabetes, metabolic syndromes, type 2 diabetes, those types of things. But polycystic ovarian syndrome is very closely linked to insulin resistance. And then we also hear things like hunger, energy cravings, mood and sleep is off. We feel that kind of hangry feeling. We feel like we have to eat every few hours, or we get really jittery or shaky, or that anxiety feeling. You know, blood sugar, poorly regulated blood sugar can be a cause of waking up in the middle of the night from like 1 to 3 a.m. It can be a cause actually of anxiety or like mood, feeling, like I said, that irritability when we haven't eaten. And fatigue. It can make us feel like we're riding this energy roller coaster where we are low blood sugar and then we need some carbs because our body's like, hey, we need some energy here. And so then your body spikes up and then drops again. You get hangry, and the blood sugar roller coaster just kind of continues all day.
So if somebody was having insulin resistance, would they typically be overweight, or is that not always the case?
It's not always the case. I think that that's something that we're sort of unraveling right now. So I think that was the theory for a long time, kind of unfairly so, to be honest. I think, you know, in the medical world, people were like seeing overweight people and saying like, well, you're probably insulin resistant, and maybe they weren't actually. And kind of, you know, I've seen a lot of like fertility patients, for example, that actually do have metabolic syndromes and things like PCOS that are preventing pregnancy, that are thin. And so they're like, well, you don't have PCOS, you're thin, you can't have that. And they do in fact have that. So it doesn't always matter what size you are.
That's really good to know, because I think, like you said, you just assume that it's people that are overweight. So thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah.
And what role does exercise and nutrition play in reducing insulin resistance?
So huge. It really is such a huge thing. Lifestyle factors are the biggest factors, in my opinion, of reducing insulin resistance. So in terms of exercise, lifting heavy weight is going to be super, super important, because if we lift like our big muscle groups, like our butt, our hips, our thighs, our shoulders, our back, that is going to increase, that muscle increases sensitivity to insulin. So if we lift more, have more lean muscle mass, we'll be naturally more sensitive to insulin. So that's really important for that. Like I mentioned, I mean, there's a lot of different factors to this. So like if you do a lot of long distance running, for example, and you're already a lot stressed out, you could produce more cortisol, and that could make it worse potentially. So you want to look at that. I'm not saying, you know, never do long distance running if we have runners out there that really like that. I'm not saying that you have to quit, but you definitely want to know what your blood sugar is doing. You want to make sure that you're balancing out with a little bit of strength training too, and just keep kind of a well-rounded approach to it. The other thing is nutrition. And I, you know, since back when I was a personal trainer, I've studied nutrition for about 15 years now. And all of my nutrition kind of goes back to balancing blood sugar. So when I'm working with patients to lose weight, or working with patients for hormone health, you know, anything in between, I tell them how to balance their blood sugar, because that will impact, like I said, hunger, energy cravings, mood, and sleep, and then weight loss, hormones, all the things. So for nutrition to balance blood sugar, I recommend kind of filling your plate with 3 things. And some people track macros and track their food. Other people like a more intuitive approach. Either one's fine, depending on what your goals are, of course. But in terms of just solely balancing blood sugar, I recommend having protein, fat and fiber on your plate. And if you can, and hopefully the fiber is like fruit and vegetable type fiber. But if you can have those three components on your plate, the protein is going to help buffer that insulin response. So remember when I said earlier, if you eat like a carbohydrate, so if you were to eat like Skittles, no fiber, nothing else in there, but just pure glucose, your body will be hungry, wanting that good glucose, quick, cheap form of energy. And then it spikes. No fiber, nothing to kind of buffer that response. And then it's just going to plummet right back down because there's nothing to really hold it up or buffer that response. But if you were to have a balanced meal of like protein, fat, and fiber, what happens is it might spike a little bit, your blood sugar, get you full, get you satiated, feeling good, a little bit of energy, but it's not going to spike up to here. It's going to spike up to here. And it's going to kind of elongate that curve. It'll slowly kind of come back down. You'll be a little hungry, 3 to 5 hours later, and then spike back up after you eat and then come back down. So you're going to be avoiding, if you eat that way, that framework, those big crashes.
Yeah, it makes so much sense. And would you typically recommend meals and snacks, or would you suggest more meals?
So that kind of depends too. I like eating meals. I like for my patients to ideally eat 3 meals per day. I think that that's a really good way. And I think that ideally we eat meals that keep us full, like I said, for 3 to 5 hours. So I don't have any problem with snacking, but sometimes there's a blood marker that's called A1C, which is a marker for blood sugar and prediabetes. And sometimes we see if people are eating a lot of frequency during the day, that number can go up a little bit. Whereas if we're getting a little bit of digestive rest in there throughout our meals and overnight, it tends to be a little bit lower, which is a good thing. So everyone sort of has their own threshold of like what that looks like. But if your A1C, your blood sugar, those types of things are higher, I recommend trying to balance out your meals so that you are not hungry for 3 to 5 hours. Obviously, if you're hungry, eat. And a lot of people with insulin resistance and low blood sugar, they can't go that long. It's really hard. They get that hangry, they get jittery and shaky. So sometimes we have to work on it for a while before they can actually even do that.
So that's a bit of a good red flag to know if that's potentially where you're sitting with the insulin resistance.
Exactly. Yeah. So if you're noticing like you have to eat every hour or two, that's a good sign that your insulin's off a little bit, or that you need to go back to the drawing board and kind of look at what you ate and make sure that there's enough protein, fat, and fiber, because probably one of them is going to be missing.
Yep. And why are carbs not the enemy?
Carbs are not the enemy. I think that we think they are all the time. We think sugar is the enemy. We think carbohydrates. We think all these things. And carbs are for several reasons. So carbs help our body metabolically. Our body is wired to want the cheap energy, like the inexpensive energy, because our body wants to burn glucose. Our brain needs glucose, our thyroid needs glucose, our metabolism, our hormones, all of those things need glucose. Now, obviously, glucose can come in the form of a Skittle, or it can come in the form of a zucchini or a sweet potato or banana or something like that. You want to add something with fiber because, like I said, that's going to buffer that insulin response some. It's going to slow down the digestive process and make it healthier on lots and lots of levels. But your body wants that energy to burn. And you can see in people who do something like keto or low carb that their thyroid starts to be impaired, their cortisol or their stress response is higher. Their hormones get impaired, like estrogen and progesterone maybe might decline a little bit from that stress response. Your brain might not be as clear. There's lots of reasons. So choose carbohydrates. Everyone sort of feels their best at a certain level. I don't like to give numbers very much, but I think most women feel pretty good between about 100 and 150 a day, kind of depending on their insulin place and their age, their activity level, their muscle mass, all of those things. But women definitely do need carbohydrates.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. And especially with some experience with fasting, I can see how it can easily mess up your hormones pretty quickly.
Me too. I've done it myself.
And so if something is not working, like for example, you're not losing weight and you're trying really hard to do so, and you feel like you're eating well and exercising, why is it really important to get to the root cause of this?
So aside from it being really frustrating that you're trying hard, you're eating the right amount, you're, sacrificing, because I always tell my patients, like, fat loss and weight loss is a huge sacrifice. We have to be diligent about it, and we have to obviously, not do things that we want to sometimes, say no, eat different foods than maybe our family and things like that occasionally. And so it is a huge sacrifice. And so I always think the worst place to be with fat loss is trying really hard to do it and not seeing the results. So if you're not seeing results, I just had a woman today who has been eating the same way for a really long time. She just started noticing that her, glutes and her hips and thighs were becoming bigger. Her shorts didn't fit as well as she wanted them to. And, subsequently her period started to get really, really heavy, and a lot of clots in there, a lot of cramps, a lot of different signs like that too. And it was definitely a hormonal imbalance for her. She had a lot of estrogen going on, not enough progesterone, which was causing her to store fat in that area. That's where we store estrogen, which can lead to that kind of weight gain there. So, if you're not seeing the results that you think you're putting in the effort, which I think we also have to be honest for the effort that we're putting in.
100%.
But if you are putting in the effort and you don't think that you're seeing results, definitely reach out to somebody like myself, a doctor, a naturopath, somebody who can sort of walk you through this and get your thyroid tested, your insulin tested, ask you about what your periods are looking like, your fatigue level, your energy, your mood, your sleep, all of those things. And it really helps to paint a really good holistic picture of what's going on.
Yes, for sure. And do you think we could just maybe get a little bit clear on exactly what effort is? Because I think some people straight away go straight to thinking like it's their hormones when it may not be.
Yeah, I think that's a really common problem. And I think, I have a good friend who does this too, and we were just talking about it today. So if you go into a caloric deficit, for example, like you're tracking your food and portions, you're weighing your food and everything, and that you're eating this amount of calories and it should be a deficit for you. But then, and so like Monday through Friday, like you're really doing that, you're grinding away in the gym, you're in that deficit. But then Saturday and Sunday comes and maybe you eat not even a lot, but maybe you go to like a barbecue or a celebration or something and you have an extra glass of wine and a piece of cake or a burger or something. I mean, that's going to be an extra potentially 1,000 calories there. And that's enough sometimes to put us out of that deficit. And it's not that much. Maybe you ate an amazing breakfast and then you had that for lunch, and then you ate a decent dinner, even like you're feeling like, I can't even have like one bad meal a week, but sometimes that is enough to bring us out of that caloric deficit. And it's frustrating for sure. And so I always tell my patients too with fat loss that, you want to make sure that you're in the right mind space to really go into a weight loss phase. Because a lot of people, they don't want to give those things up, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's fine. But you want to be honest with yourself, because it's really frustrating when 80 to 90% of the time you're eating really well and you're just not seeing that weight come off, because that 10 to 20% of the time you're eating, maybe not even off the rails, but you're just eating too many calories to bring you out of that deficit.
Yeah, so perhaps looking at the whole week of calories as opposed to just like day by day, because they can definitely
I kind of look at it exactly. I look at it sort of as an average. So I do all my progress like that. Like, okay, how many average of calories per week? What's your average weight of the week, to kind of determine progress, things like that. Because it does change rapidly day by day. Our activity levels change every day. In terms of weight and progress, there's lots of factors that change every day that go into that one number. So I do always average it out and just sort of think like big picture here, what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that people probably don't want to hear this answer exactly, but just to give people like a point of reference, if somebody's on a weight loss journey and they want to lose about 10 kilos, how many sort of cheat or treat meals, not cheat, but like how many meals a week could they really afford and still get results?
So I tell my patients when I talk about consistency. So one of the things that I say is that if you're tracking food, which a lot of people like to actually like numerically track their food, I'm good with either. I think that if you really want objective data and you really are into a fat loss phase, it's helpful. Either writing it down in a food journal, on your phone, whatever. I think that is helpful. I don't love it for long term, but for that phase, I think it's helpful. So I always tell my patients, fit in little amounts of like the treat foods. So you don't want to feel deprived. That's like the antidote to dieting. Deprivation is the worst. And so, I never want people to feel like there's foods off limits. I've walked myself back from that, from my own journey too, where I thought lots of foods were off limits and then I would crave them and feel guilty and the whole cycle. And so I never want anyone to feel that way, but you will know. I mean, if you have 1,600 calories to eat in a day, you're going to eat a whole lot more volume eating lean protein and vegetables than you are some calorically dense food. And you're going to be miserable if you just do that consistently because you're going to be really hungry. So, eat little bits of those treat foods so you can fit them into your food per day and move on. There's going to be times during the month where life happens, things don't go accordingly to plan, there's a celebration or holiday or whatever. And so for my patients with consistency, I tell them 27 out of 30 days a month.
Yeah.
We got to be consistent.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And that's a good, I think, like it's good for people to have that awareness, because sometimes,
I think that that's a decent number. And I think, even in those 3 or 4 days a month where you're kind of going over or whatever, I mean, it depends on how far you go over too. Like if you're just going to go completely off the rails for a weekend, like a 2-day weekend or something, you're probably not going to want to do that again 2 more days a month. Like you probably want to keep it together a little bit better. But if you're just, going to a barbecue, whatever, you ate 500 extra calories, you probably can afford to do that 3 or 4 times a month.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to wrap it up with one final question, what advice would you give to somebody who is bound by food rules?
So this is a great question. I love this question. I would encourage people to kind of stop the food police. So I really and truly have been through this journey on myself where I, restricted. My first diet was Atkins, which is restricting carbohydrates significantly. And so, and even in my industry, people demonize dairy and sugar and gluten and all the things, right? And so I've been there with that, and I've really had to walk myself back. And just, I think how you do that is you get educated on, what those foods actually do. They're not actually as demonic as we make them. We can fit them in. And truly realize that there really are no foods off limits. No one meal. It's never going to come down to like this one thing. It's overall, are you just subsiding on gluten and dairy? Like, you're not going to feel great. But if you eat some Greek yogurt, can be a great protein source. It's actually an amazing portion of macronutrients, protein, fat, and carbohydrates. So it absolutely can fit in. You can fit in little amounts of sugar here and there, and dairy and gluten and whatever else you want to. So I think just really following and listening to people who have a more moderate approach is really helpful.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more with that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Ali, so much for your time here today. And would you be open to share a little bit about your free gift?
Yeah, for sure. So I have a few on my website, but one of my latest ones is 6 evidence-based habits, daily habits for healthy hormones. And in there, I just go through 6 little miniature things that you can do each day to sort of ensure your healthy hormones. So things like eating protein, things like getting sleep, easy things. I'm not a fan of making this complicated and having to do all of this stuff. We're all busy and overwhelmed anyways. We don't need to add that stuff to our plate. So they're just easy, simple things to do. And it's just on my website.
Amazing. And the link will be below this video so you guys can have access to that. And I want to thank you girls all for watching today. And also please be sure to stay tuned for tomorrow's interview. I will see you then.